So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks a lot for coming to this forum. I hope it will be a very useful and insightful discussion for everyone. We have a distinguished panel of speakers, guest speakers today. We originally were supposed to have 4 guest speakers, but Professor Paul Goebel wasn't able to attend due to unexpected events, so we hope to have him on one of our future forums. Our first speaker today will be Irena Lasota. Irena is a well-known expert on democratization in post-communist countries, and she is currently the president of the Institute for Democracy in Eastern Europe. The second speaker is Rasul Jafarov. He is a human rights activist from Azerbaijan, and he's the chairman of Human Rights Club. And our third guest speaker is Rebecca Vincent. She's a commentator on current affairs in Azerbaijan. She's also a human rights activist and advocacy director at Human Rights Club. And Rebecca has also worked in the past as a foreign service officer at the U.S. Embassy in Baku. And Gorfmaz Askarov and I, both representing Azerbaijan Americans for Democracy, which hosts this event, will be moderating the discussion. So with that introduction, I really want to use my time as a host and cover a little bit of the subject of today's forum. It's very broad, but I want to cover the issues that we want to address and the questions we want to be raised. It's not a secret that under the decades of Aliyev rule, Azerbaijan has failed to achieve any meaningful progress on democracy. The country is ruled by a hereditary dictatorship where power is passed from father to son. All elections have been falsified. Not a single election was held according to minimal standards of being free and fair. And fundamental freedoms are severely restricted and routinely violated. And the ruling elite is mired in very high-level corruption, with President Aliyev himself being honored with the title of the most corrupt person in the world by watchdog or CCRP. So with that record, in spite of this record, Azerbaijan is also an important Western partner. It is involved with a lot of cooperation on security and energy, and enjoys friendly relations with both EU and United States. So this makes Azerbaijan's relations with the West rather unusual or complicated, or we can use also a word somewhat unclear. Where does Azerbaijan stand in relations to the West, and where does its future stand? And it's particularly so when we talk about priorities placed on democracy within the context of Azerbaijan's relations with the West. And for today's my small introduction, I was going to talk about the example of the fallout between US and Azerbaijan after last month's elections. And I was going to talk about strong statements that State Department issued in line with international observers, and rather milder statements that followed, and accusations from Azerbaijan against US and denials, refutations from the US side. But today we learned that actually there had been a letter sent from White House to President Aliyev wishing good luck on the third term. The reason why it's ironic, because I was going to mention in my speech that we have to give credit to the US government that in difference to major European powers, there was not anything like congratulation letter with fraudulent election victory that was sent officially from US government. So I guess that credit is wiped out. But the reason I'm mentioning it is not just to obviously point it out, but I want to also demonstrate by that example that the pressure that Azerbaijan experiences from its Western partners and the criticism on its record of democracy, the continuous pressure and encouragement by US and European governments do sometimes yield incremental results. I mean, we're witnessing release of prisoners, but the questions to be addressed on this forum is that how effective this dual form of relations, where on one side we have continued cooperation on our issues, and on our side we have a stance where we criticize Azerbaijan on democracy. Does one negate the other, or do they supplement each other? How long can these relations be sustained before one of the two elements, democracy versus our interests, loses its meaning? And also, probably even more importantly, how long Azerbaijan can stay as a Western partner with its very, let's put it this way, non-Western record or style of government on human rights and democracy? Is there any dangers that wait for the country similar to what's going on in our places in the region, where seemingly stable but authoritarian governments crumble eventually? Or can maybe it last longer than many would expect? What is the position, what is the dangers coming maybe from its neighbors, or what roles Azerbaijan plays for Iran and Russia and vice versa? So all of that we try to summarize by questioning how sustainable is status quo. And it applies both to Azerbaijan's own continuing business as usual, as well as continuing the same style and format of relations between Azerbaijan and West. So with that, I will pass the floor to the first speaker, Irena Lasota.
Okay, I think it's works. Do you hear me? Yes. Okay, so first I want to say that I'm very happy to see here so many people who had been working. That's not working. And now? Yes. So I want to repeat that I'm very happy to see here so many people whom I have seen as supporters or partisans of democracy or democratization in Azerbaijan, and some other people I don't know, but I know that they represent organizations which also were involved, at least in the last 20 years, in supporting democracy. And it's why it's very good that we are in this company to ask ourselves the question what went wrong and why it didn't got better, but instead it got worse. I will very briefly only say in 2 sentences why Azerbaijan is important for the United States, not only because we support democracy as such, but problems with Azerbaijan can become much more important for the US policy. One, as everybody knows, Azerbaijan is geopolitically very important. It's in the north. We like to call it Russia, but it's really Dagestan, which is now, or the Republic of Dagestan, which is now in real turmoil. And I think that after pacifying Chechnya, the Russians now are having a very lively activities, and not only the Russians, but also the different bandits called differently Islamist fundamentalists, etc., etc. The second, I think it's already a wasted chance of having used Azerbaijan as an example for other Muslim countries. And I think there is never enough of reminding that Azerbaijan was the first secular democracy in the Muslim world, gave rights to vote to women before Switzerland. I'm talking of the Republic of 1918, of course crushed by the Bolsheviks, but which was the rallying point in the creation of the opposition in Azerbaijan in 1988. So I think that the last elections of last month, almost a month ago, are not even that much worth discussing, because they are simply one in a long sequence of elections which are going from wars to wars to wars, until by now they don't even look like elections. They are some type somehow of gesture might be made cynically by the government in order to fulfill certain type of requirements. The fact that the campaign, electoral campaign without the opposition really having access to media lasted 1 month, that it becomes practically impossible for the opposition to register, became much worse. I mean, if one compare the elections of 2000, I'm not talking of 95 or 98, because 98 I would say were even better than the one of this year, but 2000, 2003, I have less information about 2005 because I read everything, but I was denied the visa. But the elections this year were just a total joke, reminding more of Soviet-type elections than of anything in the non-democratic post-Soviet countries. What happened with the effort of democracy building in Azerbaijan? First of all, I would say that I never, when I say I really mean also our institute, some of our colleagues, we were always against using the expression democracy building, because I don't believe that there is something which can be called democracy building. There is democracy support for democratic forces, even sometimes I would say democratic individuals can be more worth supporting than simply an organization taken from the street. When we look again, we don't have that much time, at the process of democracy building done by the US government, but also the Western Europe, and I think Western Europe is doing still even worse than the US. With time, it took different strange or different ways of behaving. First of all, I think that now we can see that there is more money going for democratization or democracy building, at the same time that the democracy features of such countries like Azerbaijan are being reduced. So my first thesis would be that money sometimes can be counterproductive or diminish the result of democratization. And if somebody has doubts about it, we can discuss it on very specific things. But in Azerbaijan, for example, money is still spent on the incredible amount of NGOs, and the NGOs have been really started to bloom after '98, and a lot of them some of them were created by the government, which discovered that NGO is one of the good way not only to get the money, because the government has the money, but of bringing good people from the really opposition or independent sector into something which is much more controlled. Look at the lawyers' organizations, for example. If you are an opposition lawyer in Azerbaijan, you lost your job already somewhere around 95, 96. Then, for a while, you could work in some NGO organization which was the case, I remember, in the late 90s, the really independent lawyers association groups, NGOs, were able to pay salaries of some lawyers for doing some consultations. With time, different government organizations created by the government started to get money for the same purpose. And lawyers were moved by bigger amounts of money, foreign travels, benefits, and so on, from the NGOs into the Gongos or official organization. The same happened with the NGOs, I'm using just this term in general, which were trained, I would say, from the late 90s again, that NGO is supposed to be in opposition to political parties. An NGO in a dictatorship should be non-political. We were trying to counterbalance it, meaning we were trying to give the non-governmental independent organization a certain type of strength, telling them, no, when you are in a very political surrounding where even being an independent lawyer or historian makes you an enemy of the government, the government makes you an enemy, you have the right to be political, but somehow I would say in big part we lost this fight about giving people strength, because also money was going behind the arguments, and the less an NGO was political, quote unquote, more money it was getting. As I said, the money never, in democracy building or support, never turned out to be an important factor, especially if we look at the fact that all of the revolutions that we know, I'm talking of the former Soviet Union, happened without practically a penny of the Western money. To go back to Azerbaijan, the 1988 demonstrations and gathering of, I don't know, 20% of the population on the AZAD Square did not require buses, did not require organizers, and most important, never required trainers. Because by now I would also say that if you look at the so-called democracy building supported by all practically Western organizations, it is a building of trainers. And since the trainers after a while like to do something else than training, so there's trainings of trainers. And then you have the whole pyramid of people training each other about what is democracy, but practically without funds or possibility of practicing democracy. In our experience, the best democrats were simply, it's what like Molière's Monsieur Jourdain, who didn't know he was speaking prose, and if you go to Azerbaijan, to small villages where people, not only in Azerbaijan, we saw it last year in Georgia, where people from a given village who never had a training, but they know that they want to elect a local official, they know very well what is cheating, what is honest. You have to give them only the tools of making sure that nobody is stuffing the ballots and nobody is beating up the opposition people or people who are suspected of being opposition to go into the voting places. I would be, I am kind of, usually, if I am ever invited, usually it's to do some provocation, and so I would say that one can see that as the number of democracy activists decreases, the number of democracy workers in Western countries grows. It used to be, let's say, look at the organizations that we know. Let's look at NED, for example. NED started as a very kind of, forceful organization, having 30 people, maybe less even. Same with NDI, IRI. And suddenly, those organizations grow into hundreds upon hundreds of people, and we have to ask ourselves a question. What happens when you have 3 or 4 or 5 people, including evaluators, for every dollar which being spent, usually 10 cents or 20 cents out of the dollar, and do we really have those thousands of so-called democracy workers, which, by the way, now, if you didn't notice, a few years ago, one started to use the expression democracy business. So in the democracy business, you have democracy workers who work as if it was a company. Google, Apple, IBM, maybe General Motors, or so on. And at the end of it are the people on the ground who have to prove in certain, I would say, non-local, understandable ways how they build democracy. They have to report, for example, on the amount of meetings, the amount of meetings is more important than doing certain things which are less measurable. The amount of women involved, the women of this category, that category. For me, it is a proof that the people who think of democracy building do not believe in democrats. They don't believe that people can become democrats just because it is an innate thing. In my experience, and I would say my experience is quite long, as you can see from my hair, I saw that most of the Democrats I met were Democrats before it was fashionable or before there were grants for the Democrats. For example, we all know of Andrei Sakharov. Andrei Sakharov had said that he had one teacher, I mean, he had many teachers, but he said the person who really taught me what are human rights is Mustafa Dzhemilev, the head of the Crimean Tatars. And the Crimean Tatars, in case you don't know, some of you know, were the ones who were the fighters for democracy, ended up in prisons, ended up in deportations, and you didn't have to explain them what democracy is, or you didn't have to teach them. I would say that the majority of the leaders of the Azerbaijan, if you can call it revolution, of 88 to 92, and which culminated with the first and only democratic election in Azerbaijan, where President Abulfaz Elchibey was elected, to be overthrown a year later by the father of today's president, who of course his main honor is not that he is the father of Ilham Aliyev, but that he was a general, member of the Politburo, first actually Azeri and non-Russian member of the Politburo, and he had many very important achievements, among other increasing the numbers of political prisoners, but also helping to form the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, of which the leader is still in prison in Turkey. So his father, Ilham Aliyev, was a great man in a certain sense. Ilham always had an opinion of being not that smart and so on, but as different post-communist countries have shown, very important in the post-communist leaders is the institutional memory. So even if Ilham did not do so well on his test in Harvard, which wherever he was, he is surrounded by people who had their experience with Haidar Aliyev, who were trained in Moscow, who were already infiltrating the opposition in the 80s, working against the democratic government in 92, 93, sometimes from within, sometimes from the outside. And if one looks at different Ilham's behaviors, and I'm talking especially his attitude towards the West, where he on one hand defies actually the West, and does exactly what he wants to do, and then he can blame the West, or make the population blame the West. He is doing exactly the same thing as Vladimir Putin. Now, is he a direct student of Putin, or do they have kind of, the same trainers? Because I believe that not only the US and the Western democracy business has trainers, but I think KGB has even more successful trainers, or whatever we call it today. KGB, whatever, etc. So the question, again, I think, is what did we, the West, or we, the United States, achieve by this policy of democratization that we had conducted in Azerbaijan? There were moments where there were more optimism and less optimism. By now I would say that Azerbaijan had never been in such a bad situation. On one hand, it is a problem of corruption, and it's not the fact that the Azeri by nature are corrupt, because some are, some not. But let's say I have once been a witness of an extremely touching moment. It was when former President Elchibey was in the United States, and he met Ambassador Kozlarich, who is sitting here, and the first word of Elchibey was, I want to thank you that after I was arrested or deported or went into Nakhichevan, you defended our gain of having concourses to the university, because I believe, and Ambassador Kozlarich also believes, that the beginning of fight with the corruption were different state measures to do. But training about corruption does not change the corruption. I think I have seen it, let's say, in Tajikistan or somewhere. It increases the corruption level because then you have more corrupted people training about the fight with corruption. there were, I would say that there are certain philosophy behind the democracy support. One of them, as I said, is the belief that teaching about democracy can be something which will change the number of people who will be Democrats. My opinion is not. The best support of democracy, as I said, is to support the Democrats, and if those Democrats happen to be members of a political party or a political party, in this case I would say, for example, the Musavat party in the year 2000, 2003 had the potential of being the one which would lead the country toward democracy, especially if they were making, which at that time they were making alliances with different other parties. We can say that the year 2003, which is halfway between the beginning of independent Azerbaijan and today, well, maybe the moment where everything started to go down, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, when I would say what was very important, people's hopes and beliefs that democracy can win were completely destroyed. It looks somewhat, according to some data, at that time IDE was there with almost 200 observers, with a grant from the State Department, to which we have been forever grateful. It looks like it's possible that Isagabbar, head of the Musavat, had won the election. The next day there was a total pacification of the population with dogs, water cannons, arrest of the people. And after that, and this was a moment when Ilham came to power. First of all, I would say, not first of all, but one of the elements to which not enough people pay attention is that until 2003 there was independent media in Azerbaijan. It was struggling media, bad sometimes media, fighting between themselves, sometimes gossipy, but there was independent media. I was surprised last year to read for the first time a longer essay telling that the government of Ilham Aliyev started to make not only grants to the newspapers, to all of the newspapers, to all of the independent newspapers. On the day of the freedom of the press, I think it's, Orwellian name, the newspapers, including the ones that we know, Yeni Musavat, AZAD, they get grants. And this year there was an official opening of a building with 300 apartments for journalists. And to which I started to check, what about the independent journalists? Yes, and there are not enough apartments because apparently, it's a poor country, okay? Aliyev is building a second building, also with I don't know how many stories, few hundred apartments. So all of the journalists, independent, dependent, they will be the same, they will be neighbors. It will be, like a house of the press, which we know was in Moscow, where more or less all of the scientists, politicians and journalists, politicians of the lower rank, were living, meeting each other, socializing, marrying between themselves and so on. So somehow, the question is, how did we allow for the independent media to be so destroyed? Of course, there is internet media, but in countries like Azerbaijan, or Belarus for that matter, internet is not sufficient. Not only we do still have people who don't have the internet, yes, if somebody can believe, but also they are unable to go to a library, which in some villages there is not even the internet and so on. So, is there a correlation between the amount of money going into Azerbaijan and the situation getting worse? Because on one side we can say there is no relationship. Okay, the money goes and the destruction of the democratic essence is still continuing, or is the Western support so badly managed that it creates such a situation as today in Azerbaijan? If one was to ask, what can be done, I would say to completely rethink and rework the support for the independent press, and even if it would mean to find the new networks which are starting to do some, I don't know, underground or something. And the second is to examine support for all of the NGOs which has the name of the NGO. There are certain lessons to be learned. For about 10 years, the main democracy building organization in Washington, which were supporting democracy, were putting most of the money into an organization which was run by a gentleman who spoke very good English, who simply later turned out to be, which was not that difficult to see it in '95, to be a member or supporter of the Aliyev government. I have in this case have in mind Irena Lasota, who was a darling of several democracy support organizations in this town. Even after he was seen already and denounced as a person working for the government, but he was something who was sucking in this end. So to see where the money goes, but not for the evaluations that the grantees have to fulfill, but to send an independent evaluation group composed of people who do not get money from the government or did not get anything to write a report. How did we mess up the last 20 years? Thank you very much.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here today, and I want to say thank you to Elmar and Gokmaz for organizing this event and also inviting me to speak here. I'm very proud of that. Our organization is focusing on political freedoms and rights in Azerbaijan, and at the same time we are trying to implement different campaigns, public awareness campaigns, or using the events, big events such as Eurovision Song Contest or Internet Governance Forum, or some sport events to change the situation in Azerbaijan. So that's why my topic today will be the current situation in Azerbaijan and how we see the things can be changed in the nearest future. And it will be recommendations which we are working on also for ourselves. And I will also try to build my speech on the arguments of Azerbaijani government, what they trying to use in international fora to justify their position and to show the positive image of the current government. I think the government of Azerbaijan systematically violates the human rights. If we see the statements by Azerbaijani government, they are always, the government officials, they are always trying to say that such kind of violations are not only in Azerbaijan but also in other countries. We are working on these problems and we hope that soon we will manage to solve them. But if we see the chronology of violations of human rights in Azerbaijan, we can definitely say that it is systematic violations, and systematic human rights violations means Azerbaijani government is not interested in human rights and democracy at all. And despite of their statements, in reality, they are acting in a totally different way. And why they are saying it? Because their other aim, by violation of the rights and freedoms systematically, are very simple. There are two main reasons: to create fair atmosphere in the society and to create self-censorship among the activists, politicians, journalists, bloggers, religious people, and doing this they have also another, let's say, reason, just to stay in the power as they, the more as they wish, and steal the money which Azerbaijani nation has because of the oil and the other natural resources. I mentioned different categories like journalists, politicians, activists, and etc., religious activists, and etc. All these categories are the people who arrested or already imprisoned for their criticism of the Azerbaijani government. I mean, no matter, you can be a politician, you can be young activist, you can be a journalist, you can be activist without any political affiliation, but if you are just criticizing the Azerbaijani government, if you are raising the issues what the Azerbaijani government just doesn't like, you can be very easily targeted, and we can see it in our practice today. We recently released the list of the political prisoners in Azerbaijan, and we have 140 cases, and among of these people we can find those categories what I mentioned just now. Freedom of assembly is another topic which we focus on, so very briefly I want also to touch this issue. Despite of the quite good legislation, in practice there is no freedom of assembly at all in Azerbaijan, because our constitution and the law says that any person can notify the executive power and organize, conduct its demonstration or another event, meetings, where and when they wish. The executive power just to take care about the safety and security of the participants of this event. But what we see in the practice for the last 8 years in Azerbaijan, that executive power of Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, or the regions, saying that we do not allow you to conduct demonstration in concrete place. Do not allow, there is no like definition of understanding that executive power can allow or not can allow someone or some group to organize protest demonstration or any other kind of event in the city center or in another place. What at the same time we see for the last 8 years that the executive power sending the organizers and participants of the demonstrations only to one place, which is 10 kilometers away from the city center, and it's a very remote place. I mean, basically there are no public transportation which people can use to reach this area. And here I also have to touch the issue of the elections, because another argument of Azerbaijani government is about that during the elections any politician or any political groups can do their meetings, and it can be under open air or it can be in the concrete venues. But let's see how it's happening in the practice. In the practice, the executive power publishing the list of the places where politicians and political groups can meet their potential voters. And if we will look to the last elections, executive power published one place for open demonstrations, I mean the demonstration under the open air in every district. So I mean if some politician will decide to do demonstration in place B, let's say, not in place A within one district, that demonstration will be not sanctioned and the police will come and arrest you. So it means publishing of such kind of list is not guarantee of the freedom of assembly. It is limitation and restriction of the freedom of assembly, in fact. And here I also want to touch very briefly the freedom of association, which is also very problematic, not only for other people but also for the civil society in Azerbaijan who is trying to change the things better in the country. And as a good example, I can mention our organization, because we are working without registration almost 3 years, and despite of applying to the Ministry of Justice several times, they refused to register us. We also submit a complaint to the court, but unfortunately the courts also didn't fulfill our complaints. And it's not only us in this situation. There are almost 1,000 NGOs who hasn't registration and has the same problems. And when we are talking about the freedom of association, we also should touch the issue of political parties. And here the situation is also very concerning. It's not only about the registration of political parties. Maybe it is not so difficult to register a political party in Azerbaijan, but in the practice it is very difficult for the political parties to act. And after the last amendments, which made by Azerbaijani parliament to the law on political parties last year, the registration and the activities of the political parties became more problematic. And if you will see the statistics, no one decided to create political party in Azerbaijan after that last amendments, during this last one year. Despite of this not so positive developments in Azerbaijan, I think the people who are working to change the situation for the better should be more optimistic than others, because I think we in any case don't have other options first. Secondly, if we decided that we want to be in this sphere and we want to change the things for the better, we just have to continue and we have to do our best to change the situation. So, I mean, compared, for example, to my most of colleagues in Azerbaijan, I am more optimistic about the next 2-3 years in terms of possibilities to change the situation for the better. However, it will be very difficult because, as I said, in Azerbaijan there are systematic violations of the rights and freedoms, and the government who systematically violates rights, it means this government is dictatorship. So because of that, we realize that it will be very difficult, but I think we just have to continue. So what my recommendations actually to ourselves, and first of all, we think that we have to just continue our activities and not to stop and not to be pessimistic because of Azerbaijani government behaving. We should stop the self-censorship, what we potentially have for ourselves. We just should ignore self-censorship and we just maybe forget this definition, this word. And we have to find more creative ways how we can involve, how we can engage people to the human rights protection and promotion. As an example, again, I want to mention our other campaign, which is Art for Democracy, and which is a continuation of Sing for Democracy, which we had ahead of Eurovision Song Contest in 2012. We think that art, artistic expression, and also some other creative ways which we have to work on them can be more useful, can be more effective in involving in engagement of the people, and especially young people, to the, let's say, area which we call human rights and democracy. The second thing, I think we should work with the people not only in the capitals or city centers in Azerbaijan, but we have to start to go to the regions of the country. And again, however, it can be very difficult and very dangerous because you can be very easily arrested, how we see it in the example of Ilgar Mammadov, who is chairman of a Republican Alternative Movement, who went to Ismaili region where unrest happened there in January of this year, and he just arrested because of his short trip to Ismail 1 day after of actually the main unrest happened already in this region, and right now he's in jail and he can be imprisoned at least for 6 years. So basically realizing the difficulties and realizing the dangers of such kind of creative ways and ways working with the people mostly in the regions of Azerbaijan, still we have to do it, because again, if we are in this way and if we want to have success in the end of this way, so we have to be optimists and we have to continue our activities. I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to be here today back in Washington, D.C. and speaking to you. I want to thank AZAD for organizing this. It's very encouraging to see an engaged diaspora here, and I think that events like this are an important antidote to the more caviar-laden events that the government and its supporters work to put on here in Washington and throughout Europe. Rasul did a good job covering freedom of assembly and freedom of association. I just wanted to start by speaking briefly on freedom of expression, as that has been one of the predominant human rights concerns in the country for many years. Restrictions on the exercise of freedom of expression really have a knock-on impact on the exercise of all other human rights. Among the country's 140 political prisoners, which Rasul mentioned, there are 9 journalists and 1 blogger. Arrest and politically motivated detention and imprisonment of journalists has been a major way that they've been targeted for many years. The trend has shifted from several years ago when journalists were arrested for things clearly connected with their work, like defamation, to now other seemingly unrelated crimes ranging from hooliganism, drug possession, tax evasion, supporting terrorism, treason, you name it. The idea is to make it more confusing, I think, for outsiders to recognize which cases are politically motivated and which are not. But the intention is to silence these critical voices. Violence against journalists has been a major problem for many years as well. Since the March 2005 murder of Monitor magazine editor-in-chief Elmar Husseinov, there have been more than 200 documented violent attacks against journalists in Azerbaijan, the vast majority of which have gone uninvestigated and unprosecuted. This has created a climate of serious impunity for those who wish to use violence to silence critical voices, and a climate of fear, which has resulted in the self-censorship that Rasul has mentioned. The state completely controls the broadcast media in Azerbaijan. The 9 television channels are either private, some of the privately owned stations are controlled by the state through means such as control of advertising revenues, and even the public service broadcaster is failing to provide balanced and varied programming to the population. The internet is sort of our only hope, but internet freedom is also deteriorating. I think a few months ago, the introduction of the extension of the criminal defamation provisions to online content show the government's intent to take further action to punish those who turn to the internet to express criticism. But really, the main point of my presentation will be that Azerbaijan is not this reliable international partner that it is working very hard to promote itself as. Azerbaijan is failing across the board to implement its international human rights obligations. Azerbaijan has committed itself to these obligations through joining bodies such as the United Nations and the Council of Europe, and through acceding to or ratifying a number of international and regional treaties, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the European Convention on Human Rights, which is quite important as it brings Azerbaijan under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights, which really represents the only hope of justice for many Azerbaijanis. And along with this, I also want to speak about the deterioration in relationships really this year, Azerbaijan's growing hostility towards the international community on human rights issues. So the Council of Europe this year has one really important development that has changed really relations between Azerbaijan and this body is in January, a key resolution on the follow-up to the issue of political prisoners was defeated. This was the result of years of lobbying by the Azerbaijani authorities and a very contentious debate within the Council of Europe related to the mandate of Christoph Strasser, who is a German MP, who was appointed as a special rapporteur to look into the issue of political prisoners in Azerbaijan. The Azerbaijani government refused to cooperate with him to an unprecedented extent within the Council of Europe, refused to issue him a visa, so he was unable to travel to the country to undertake a fact-finding mission in accordance with his mandate. He was then obligated to produce this report without actually having traveled to the country, a fact which then the Azerbaijani delegation used to draw support away from the report. So this, the report and accompanying resolution were defeated in January, and as a result there has been a sharp increase in politically motivated arrests from 60 recognized cases at the time of the vote to 140 today. The Azerbaijani government took that as a victory. They were very clearly jubilant in Strasbourg after the vote, and it is obvious that since that vote there is a confidence that it will not be held accountable at the Council of Europe. This is really concerning this year, as soon, from May to November next year, in fact, Azerbaijan will take chairmanship of the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers. It will be in a position of political leadership at the body at the very time when its implementation of its Council of Europe human rights obligations is lowest. The European Union has an interesting relationship with Azerbaijan. I think relations have strengthened this year, but at the expense of the relationship on human rights. In March, the EU extended a memorandum of understanding on energy with Azerbaijan amidst one of the worst crackdowns on freedom of assembly and freedom of expression in the country, without including anything related to human rights in this agreement. In June, President Aliyev traveled to Brussels, where he was warmly welcomed by top EU officials who failed to prioritize human rights in their dialogues with Aliyev. And in fact, European Commission President Barroso gave a joint press conference with President Aliyev after these meetings, during which President Aliyev made confident claims that there were no political prisoners in Azerbaijan, there was media freedom in Azerbaijan, there was internet freedom, etc. Things that are simply not true, well documented to be not true. Barroso did not say a word. And the fact that Aliyev made these claims in this press conference showed that he was confident that the EU would not speak up and not hold Azerbaijan accountable for these obligations. Now Azerbaijan is in negotiations with the EU for things like a visa facilitation agreement, and potentially other partnerships, whether it's in the form of an association agreement or a strategic management partnership. There is interest, I think, of Azerbaijan to formalize its relationship with the EU. And from a human rights perspective, we think it's really important that human rights benchmarks be included in these agreements, because once they're reached, this opportunity will be lost forever. This year, Azerbaijan's relations with the OSCE have been very rocky. At the beginning of the year, it was made public that the Azerbaijani government was requesting a downgrade in mandate for the OSCE office in Baku. Initially, some member states pushed back quite hardly, and there was months of tense diplomatic negotiations, but eventually this push was successful. So as of the 1st of January, the OSCE's presence in Baku will be downgraded to a project coordination office. Around the same time, the invitation to the OSCE's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, OSCE ODIHR, their invitation to monitor Azerbaijan's October presidential elections was delayed far longer than usual. They were eventually invited to the country, and they did monitor the election. The statement of preliminary findings the day after the election was quite critical. It pointed to many violations in the campaign period and on election day, and concluded that the election fell far short of meeting international standards. However, the Azerbaijani government was not happy with with this report, with this statement, and very quickly and harshly reacted, stating that it would have to reconsider whether it will cooperate with ODIHR again in the future. So that shows that when things don't go the way that the authorities expect them to, the relationships can very quickly deteriorate. I didn't mention in the context of the Council of Europe and the EU the monitoring reports, but I'll mention those now. The OSCE ODIHR was not the only body that monitored the election and reported on it. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and the European Parliament sent their own delegations. Unlike ODIHR, which is comprised of professional and independent monitors, the PACE and European Parliament delegations were comprised of politicians who have an agenda. Many of them were known apologists for the Azerbaijani regime and have been featured in reports such as Caviar Diplomacy, How Azerbaijan Silenced the Council of Europe, which is well worth the read if you haven't read it already. It's put out by the European Stability Initiative. Well, the PACE and European Parliament delegations seem to have monitored a different election from OSCE ODIHR altogether. They stated the day after the election that they had not witnessed a single violation and that the election met democratic standards. This shows that these bodies, these are the political arms of these bodies, but really action needs to be taken to address their behavior. I will say the European Parliament did address this. They added in a resolution about something else, more broadly about the region, that that the European Parliament more broadly supported OSCE ODIHR's findings and condemned the conduct of the election. But the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has yet to issue any such resolution or any statement. The United Nations, Azerbaijan generally takes care to tick the boxes in its behavior with the UN to a certain extent. This year, Azerbaijan was in, or has been in a position of leadership as a this year and last year, I should say, as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. And in fact, last month, during this election for the month of October, Azerbaijan was president of the UN Security Council. Azerbaijan is quite active at the UN, but again, it's failing to implement any of its UN human rights obligations. Azerbaijan was reviewed this year by the Human Rights Council in the context of the Universal Periodic Review. This was Azerbaijan's second UPR, which resulted in many recommendations about violations of fundamental rights and fundamental freedoms and human rights in Azerbaijan. The majority of which were accepted by Azerbaijan, except for the 4 recommendations from Armenia. But they are good recommendations, many of them, and we hope that they will be used seriously as a benchmark in the next UPR in 4.5 years' time. Also this year, Azerbaijan was reviewed by the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which pointed to many shortcomings in Azerbaijan's implementation of that treaty, including pressure against NGOs and the registration issue and property rights. So I guess Azerbaijan's failure to implement its human rights obligations shows that actually it is not this reliable international partner. It is picking and choosing which of its international obligations it will implement. That is not reliable. There needs to be more action taken, both bilaterally from the US government, from European governments, and in these international bodies to hold Azerbaijan accountable for these obligations which it took upon itself. I think it's not just a matter of funding, it's a question of political pressure. I think a starting point would be any agreements that are being negotiated with Azerbaijan, such as those in the EU context, should very much pay attention to the human rights issues as well and include clear benchmarks. There's a need for more attention to individual cases and trends. I think given the sheer volume of deterioration in this issue, it appears usually to be just more bad news from Azerbaijan. We found that over the years, the more violations there are, the less attention there is to individual cases. But each and every one of these cases is a human being, is a violation, and the fact that there are so many does not excuse not paying attention to any of them. So anywhere possible, attention to individual cases of imprisonment or violence or NGOs that are struggling for survival or critical media outlets is very much needed. I'd say that it's really necessary to ensure that this regime is not given unmerited carrots or rewards. For example, given the conduct of this election and the current human rights situation, something like a Washington visit of President Aliyev would be catastrophic, in our opinion. It would really lend legitimacy to an undemocratically elected president. And something that I feel that would be most effective, but perhaps most difficult to achieve politically, would be any actions taken to hold individuals within the government accountable. If individual ministers, others within the government were named and shamed for their role in these abuses, or if they were unable, for example, to travel to the US or European countries where they so liked to go shopping and on vacation, where they own properties and where their kids study, I think that would result in some very quick changes. Okay, I think I'll leave it at that for now, but I'm happy to take questions on any of these.
To kickstart the discussions, I wanted to make several general observations. The behavior of the entire government apparatus of Azerbaijan during the last presidential elections allows us to say that at this point, the Azerbaijani government seems to have abandoned its claims that it's a legitimate government governing the country with the consent of the people. But what it claims is that it's still a government nevertheless, and that it is still in charge of Azerbaijan, for better or for worse. With the 85% victory announcement at the presidential elections, Ilham Aliyev has signaled to the world that he intends to make Azerbaijan look more and more like Turkmenistan. The question is, what can be the expected level of cooperation between the Aliyev's Azerbaijan and the Western democracies, which have an obvious clash of values with such a government? In this regard, I would like to mention the congratulation ordeal for the Azerbaijani president's elections. It appeared that the Western democracies, and most notably Great Britain and the United States, had quite serious difficulties in congratulating Ilham Aliyev with the presidential elections. But in 3 weeks' time, after the elections, for the US it took until today, they somehow managed to force themselves into congratulating Ilham Aliyev, playing with words. From Great Britain, the congratulation letter came with some overly mentioning the word the third term. With President Obama's letter, according to our information, the letter did not mention the word election, but in that letter, President Aliyev was congratulated with assuming the position of the President of the country. So how happy would Ilham Aliyev be with such a congratulation? How happy is the Western countries in giving this congratulation to Ilham Aliyev? And how happy is Azerbaijani people with seeing all of this? Another question is, how stable can this cooperation be? It's again an age-old dilemma between what is possible and what is desirable. The realist position, sometimes argued articulately and sometimes just implied, is that there's only so much the Azeri people can do at this moment, and that right now the Aliyev regime is the product of the limits of the Azerbaijani people's capabilities. Is that true? Or is this a brazen lie, which is imposed on the Azerbaijani people until it explodes into a chaos of violent revolution? After all, Iran's Shah, Libya's Gaddafi, Egypt's Mubarak were also regarded as the only possible options for their abused people up until the day when the people hit the streets and overthrew their tormentors. Another important question is, what is a meaningful international support for the cause of democracy? Every election year, the Azerbaijani people witness the same sequence of events. The Azerbaijani government kickstarts the election season with an expected wave of pre-election crackdown on the civil society. The international community expresses certain concerns. Brief political activeness by the opposition is temporarily tolerated by the Azerbaijani government as a result of such pressures. Then comes the election day. Falsifications, the announcement of the election victory for the regime's candidates, brief post-election criticism by the international community, expected frictions between the international community and the Azerbaijani government, and finally settlement, congratulations, return to the business as usual with the regime, which prolonged its life just through another rigged election show. In fact, the Azerbaijani government's propaganda machine has an established narrative to describe this cycle of events. This propaganda line is that the Western governments are using the human rights and democracy problems as a tool to pressure Azerbaijan during the government's vulnerable times, namely the election seasons. and that the end goal here is to use the human rights and political freedoms issues as bargaining chips in order to force some lucrative concessions out of the hands of the Aliyev government elsewhere, like in the fields of energy, foreign policy cooperation, etc. At the moment, this narrative seems to have been adopted even by the Azerbaijani opposition and even by the pro-democracy civil society groups. What can the international community, the Western governments, realistically do to turn the democratization efforts into something more meaningful than a pre-talk to its energy and security cooperation negotiations with the Aliyev government? Coming up with a genuine answer to that question can help to clear the Azerbaijani democracy discussions from a lot of meaningless or even harmful empty rhetoric. Finally, people's actions have consequences, and more so when we are dealing with a political situation in an authoritarian country. Last year and the beginning of this year, as AZAD, when we met with the representatives of pro-democracy institutions in the US, we would frequently face a question as to who we saw as viable proponents of democratic values in Azerbaijan, so that the international pro-democracy groups would focus on helping their initiatives. And frequently we would name NIDA, a recent and promising initiative of the Azerbaijani youth. Today, 7 of the NIDA members are in jail, facing serious jail time. Almost the entire leadership of NIDA was arrested during the months preceding the presidential elections in the country. And now they are facing ridiculous charges which can land them in prison for up to 12 years. If the international community is not strong enough to help this new generation of democrats, it ought to be able to at least feel a certain responsibility to protect these people from becoming the victims of targeted repressions. At the moment, in Azerbaijan, the Azerbaijani government's propaganda line seems to be winning. Can we challenge this view? Thank you.
Answer part, so please, if you have a question or comment, raise your hand, and you will be approached with a mic, so you can ask questions or express comments. So please raise your hand.
Rich Kostler, it's George Mason University. Thanks to the panel, it was a very good discussion, presentation, and I think what's lacking in Washington these days is a presentation of an alternative narrative to the one of the regime. So events like this, I think, give an opportunity, and congratulations to all of you for all that you're doing for Azerbaijan. I have a sense that for a regime whose president was just elected with 85% of the vote, that this regime is very vulnerable. I would appreciate your reaction to this. I mean, if you look at the economic situation of Azerbaijan, oil production is dropping off, gas production is dropping off. There will be no new energy supplies coming on stream until 2018, 2019. The regime has gotten very used to living off upwards of $90 billion of revenue that have been generated up to this point, if you believe Hushput from SOCAR. I think that the economy is the one thing that really needs to be highlighted more, the need for economic reform, the need for better distribution of the income that is there, and the vulnerability that Azerbaijan is facing in the near term if it doesn't begin to change the way it operates. One last point. I think we need, as both outsiders and insiders, to look for different ways of measuring democracy. We've gotten into this pattern of sending observers and giving a thumbs up or thumbs down and vote on what happens on election day. And it's much more complicated than that. And I don't have an answer to that question, but I think the report of the European Stability Initiative on the last elections in Azerbaijan raises a very good question about long-term versus short-term observers and whether we in fact do need to rethink that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I guess that would be a question or points to all presenters. If anybody wants to.
I agree that maybe sometimes too much emphasis is placed on elections and in particular election day. As we've been saying all year, really, before we even got to this election, it was already impossible for it to be fair and free. The underlying climate was such that there was not a fair and free competition. I mean, economically, the argument I think needs to be put forward more that really the best protector of Western interests in Azerbaijan, economic interests as well, is a mature democracy that respects human rights and the rule of law. Otherwise, things could very quickly change and those interests, which have so far been the priority, won't be protected. I think, does anybody else want to comment specifically on this? Thank you for your
from the Chicago area. This is for Russell. Could you speak to us a little more about what you think the strategy of the opposition should be over the next 2 or 3 years, and what the opposition strategy seems to be? And I ask this question because immediately after Election Day, it seemed to me that there were 2 main premises that were coming out from very significant, very high-level sources in the opposition. One was, okay, we've got the National Council, and surely that's really important. It's going to last for years, and it'll never dissolve, blah, blah, blah. And this is a very important development. The second premise was, all right, this election didn't go the way we hoped, but just wait until 2015. Just wait till the next election. And I was somewhat, I have to say, astonished at this. Because it seems to me to be a very self-defeating and weak strategy. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what the opposition strategy ought to be and what it actually is.
Very much for the question. It's actually not so easy to answer this question because when we are like criticizing ourselves, the political parties and mainly the traditional political parties that you are not doing anything, they accept it in a right way, and they say that we don't have like enough opportunities and let's say landscape to act how they wish. They said we are under restrictions, we are under pressure, it's not so easy for us. And I totally agree with you that the political parties or politicians in Azerbaijan today shouldn't think about the 2015 parliamentary elections, just because of one very simple reason, that we will have in December of the next year municipal elections, local elections. Unfortunately, what we observed for the last years, the opposition parties never had a real interest to the local elections, and they were much focusing on like parliamentarian and presidential elections, which I think was wrong. These local elections is a very good opportunity to start to talk to the people and, as I mentioned in my presentation, with the people from the regions of Azerbaijan, and it's a very good opportunity to hear them and share your ideas with them. And I'm sure that they will have more success if they will be very serious about the local elections in 2014. From another hand, it's very good thing what I can share with you, that I know right now a lot of young people who actually started to think to run for the local elections in next year. It shows that they realized before the political parties that the local elections can be very effective and useful to change the things. Other thing what the political parties can do, I think they have to say what are they doing daily. For example, I don't know what the leaders of political parties do every day. I mean, I don't know, they are coming to the office, okay, and what they are doing after this. I mean, I don't have information about it, and it seems, I'm not blaming, but it seems for me that they are not doing anything. So they just have to work in a daily basis, they have to work hard a lot. Azerbaijani government will continue to put a pressure on them. They will continue the repressions. So it is not the like right justifications that we can't do anything because of the pressures and because of the like repressions. They will be afterwards also. I mean, we have to do something else. So, yeah. And creative ways. I mean, we have to find the creative ways, and the political parties also, which is very difficult. I mean, you asking this question, I started to think it's not easy to find something immediately, but there should be some strategies and joint strategies and united, let's say, opposition or unification of the political parties is very important also. I mean, without it, it will be very difficult to achieve something for the political parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Parker from George Washington University. The previous speaker mentioned the potential of municipal elections. And I'm wondering, do you think there's potential because in some ways those elections are less crucial for the regime than, say, national elections, presumably? And have there been municipal elections in the past? And what were the patterns there? I assume there's quite a bit of manipulation by the regime, but not 100% based on what you're saying. And is there any way that we can increase international press attention when those elections do take place?
Why I see that it can be effective, because it will be another opportunity of direct conversation, direct communication of politicians or political parties or independent people who really want to see the democracy in the country and explain the importance of the things to them. Let's see the tele-debates of the last presidential elections, how much it changed the situation. I mean, it was totally apathy in the society of Azerbaijan before this tele-debate starts. So, and actually, these facts again proves that there should be used any kind of chances, including local elections, to raise the issues and to listen to people and also to explain to people why the current situation is bad and how it can end. You know, because ordinary people, ordinary citizens, it's very difficult, I think, for them to understand how the things will end if the situation will continue like this. You know, someone should explain them that if the things will stay like now, there is no like good and bright future of Azerbaijan, and which means that there is no future for the citizens of the country. So that's why I think it can be effective. I personally never ran for the like municipal elections. I was observing municipal elections in 2009. Their turnover like is not high, unfortunately, and basically there is no interest to local elections, and it is in the interest of the current regime. They don't want that people has the interest to any kind of elections. I think the municipal elections of 2014 should be, should be changed for something very super thing in the country, very big thing in the country. What can help to change the situation?
And we're going to take a couple of questions at a time. I think there was one hand raised. it's kind of related to the first question about possible outcomes. And the last question was about even if Azerbaijan runs out of oil, why it should break down. There have been other dictators, dictatorships that have been gone without oil for a long time, and even Aliyev without much oil for 10 years. I guess, I mean, these questions, I would say probably any panelist can answer any questions that you like. We'll try to make sure and then we'll go in our round of questions. Just trying not to pile up too many. Okay,
I think that all of those questions are very interesting and important. Should I push something? No, it is here. And maybe going back to the last two questions about Azerbaijan's, what would happen if the dictator is overthrown. I would say that several years ago I would not worry at all about it because there was no example or tradition or even moments of democracy in countries like Egypt, Libya, or Iran. If there was in Iran, maybe it was 2,000 years ago, but I don't go that fast. While in Azerbaijan, there were several very successful examples. They were short-lived, but in both cases, in 1918 and in 1992 or 1988-92, that shows that it's a completely different type of society than the one which were mentioned as the one where the overthrowing of dictators ended in chaos and in the possibility of entering of different scary people. Which brings me to the idea how much the US policy changed toward Azerbaijan after 9/11. There is this example I said of Putin and Aliyev being very similar, meaning that using the threat of possible radical Islam or terrorist attacks is something that kept, or at least kept for a while, the US from criticizing some horrendous acts by Russia. And from what I know, but I don't have direct data about it, this is also one of the messages sent to the United States, at least by the different diplomats and people close to the government, saying we will defend the country from terrorists. We are at the border with Iran. Now, if one looks at it, we all know that societies in which there are no democratic institutions, there is no trust, fall exactly into this pattern of a chaotic revolution. First, the very goodwill people go on the street and they talk about love and about democracy, and then whoever is in the background can catch them. And so far, there was no even there were no signs that there are some forces or alternative forces in Azerbaijan like there were in Egypt. That, the overthrow Mubarak, then the Brotherhood takes over, and then the post-Mubarak kicked out the Muslim Brotherhood. In Azerbaijan so far, we have not seen signs that there is a possibility of such a scenario, but I think more and more we move away in Azerbaijan from strong democratic voices, even if they are being voiced by political parties who somehow unjustly have a bad opinion. I would say that those political parties are possibly the guarantor of the street or national uprising being channeled into the decent ways. But more time goes away, it becomes worse. I'm a very, very big pessimist. There is a safety valve in Azerbaijan, which is the immigration, about which we didn't talk. After 93, there was the first wave of immigration. Then throughout the 90s it was going slower. After 2003, again I'm talking of the immigration of young people, of future elites, really was increased. And something is happening that the young people who, I would say, were either from democratic families or from democratic backgrounds, they end up in the West very often with very few possibilities, while hundreds, if not more, of stipends offered by the Azeri government goes into the creation of the new elites. And there are, it's very known in Azerbaijan, it's distributed as one of the achievements of the government, that hundreds of people go to study abroad. They study economics, they study sociology. I would assume that some of them also study psychology, which later will be used in the, among other, destruction of the opposition. So here we are not replacing or helping to replace the new elites of the Democrats. As I said, I don't believe the trainings of anybody would help it, but coming to the West and being at least at the same level as the children and grandchildren of the post-communist and dictatorship elite would help. Going to the ideas of the regions, I remember times where the parties were much more active in the regions. But there is something about political parties. Political parties which cannot defend their members are not effective political political parties. In the 90s, I would say both the Party of Popular Front and of the Musavat were able much more to support not only their members, but the people whom they were putting up for elections. And I would say that the period between 95 and 2000 showed that the local election, I'm not saying one should not work in the regions, but let's not forget that they tried, and this is where the government also thought it's a very dangerous path, and it's much easier for the government to get rid of the opposition in the regions than it is in Baku. In Baku they also managed very well to do it. In order to have to win in the local elections, one would need about 12,000 active people, I am saying at least, who would be in some places candidates, then there would be monitors, there should be journalists, etc., etc. And my last comment for the time being is about the professionalism of the audio. They can be okay. But in countries like Azerbaijan, or for that matter Georgia, or for that matter Uzbekistan, the professionalism would mean that you do not travel from one voting place to another. Because we have seen it, and Odir knows about it, but it's very difficult to have important monitors and observers sitting for 14 hours without moving from their seat. Usually, what you need to observe the elections are 2 monitors, so one can go to the bathroom, and 1 translator. And we tried it successfully, and some other people also. This is the only way to know what's happening during the elections. And if one doesn't have enough monitors to put in every polling station, you put half of them in places where you know that something will happen, and half of them randomly. And again, you can get quite good elections. So Odir may, I also find that the report of the Odir, okay, was critical. It was critical, I would say, much. It was a joke. Okay, it was critical, but I would say did not really describe what was happening during those elections or during previous elections. And the harsh reaction of Aliyev to me is a sign that he knows that he can do whatever he wants, because simply next time he's not going to allow any more observers, or he will just handpick them like he did handpick some of them for this election now, which took place in October.
I'll just respond briefly to Uvi's question about whether it's realistic maybe to encourage individual sanctions. I think it will be quite difficult to achieve politically, but that's the single thing that I see that could be most effective. I mean, after years of sort of hand-wringing and brow furrowing and sort of asking what we can do, I think this is a government that individually pursues its critics, its opponents, and I think it would respond to being, these officials would respond to being singled out themselves. I think if we look at the discrepancy between the approach, for example, to Belarus and Azerbaijan, you know, how many times has Belarus been referred to as Europe's last dictatorship? I think that's actually not the case. When you look at the situation in Azerbaijan, if you compare, you know, if you compare situations really in many ways, human rights, there's a bigger crisis now in Azerbaijan than Belarus. Why were you treating Lukashenko one way and Aliyev a completely different way? But not just at the top. I mean, if you look, even if we look at maybe reciprocity, the Azerbaijani authorities have they've prevented a U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State from traveling to the region. They've prevented the EU head of mission from coming to the country. They prevent many foreign journalists from entering, and this doesn't get reported because journalists want to protect their ability to enter. So I know of many cases where journalists have been asked to provide copies of their articles on Azerbaijan and they can't get a visa if they've been known to be critical. You know, there's cases of activists such as myself who are barred from the country, and yet we don't ever do anything reciprocal. I think that there's things that could be examined and could be quite useful.
I think that the one against the Belarus government and not the government, the really most important people involved in the repression were to some extent working, and I think at least it annoyed the government enough that they are kind of trying to do something to lift them. But for Washington, there is one more thing that we didn't touch upon, because we cannot touch upon all of the points, but here I will touch it, which is really to look at Washington and to answer the question, who is stronger? The pro-Aliyev lobby or the pro-democracy lobby? And I would say that 10, 15 years ago, you could see in the pro-democracy lobby, there were congressmen, senators, there were people even from the business, while today, the pro-democracy lobby is, I could hardly call it a lobby. I mean, you know, these are our colleagues, maybe a few other people, while the pro-Aliyev lobby is huge. It's, some of them are paid to the amount of $5 million a year or a month.
Well, it's one of the...
No, but the 5 million number is for a year.
Yeah.
But we know, that, I mean, if you add to it, you know, the trips, the parties, and so on, so who will allow to even discuss on the floor of the Congress or in the State Department openly the ideas of the sanctions when before even one starts to say the letter S, the lobbies, which as we know are composed from previous congressmen, senators, State Department officials, advisors to presidents, they are all the time watching that nobody writes anything critical about Azerbaijan. And really those names of those lobbying firms are on the internet, and it's not a secret. Simply, we know that the money, partly maybe also given by the US for other purposes, are then being recycled into paying the lobbyists. Somebody's protesting? NSA is saying something? No.
Before actually Gorkman is going to respond, and then we'll move the comment to the next round of questions. But I want to talk about the lobbying organization. It is a public record, and not only the names of how much money comes to DC from Aliyev's lobbying groups, but even the sources of that money, the organizations that are listed along with President Aliyev himself, the members of his government, among the most corrupt people in the world, there are entities, business entities that are listed in those investigative reports are officially registered here as paying for lobbying organizations. So it is a public record, it's not a secret. And how to fight it, I think the biggest probably counter-lobbying efforts to it should be evaluation how much does it damage US national interests. Having a small, energy-rich, halfway criminal regime in terms of corruption and being unelected, bankrolling, and effectively, to some extent, maybe buying US foreign policy. I mean, that's not proven we yet to see, like, but it does affect definitely public opinion. And I guess if this is all open, free, democracy, so they can do that. But I think the biggest counterweight is not just matching them with another powerful lobbying efforts, but actually, winning the debate whether it's good for U.S. national interest to have that. And I'm going to give Gormas to answer to the question that was addressed to him. We will move to our country.
My answer will be brief. Will Democrats shift to Russia or Iran? Democrats are not Democrats because they are supported by anyone, including the West. Democrats will not shift, but Democrats will be smashed. As the people will look for answers to the proponents of other ideologies. Already today, we have got political prisoners who represent not only Democrats, but also religious activists. While Democrats, being Democrats, have embraced them and have been vocal in supporting their rights, I don't think they would be as supportive when they become the dominant voice in the opposition, but it's again for the future. I would also like to respond briefly to the gentleman from France and also invite others to comment on the comment which was being made, because that was a very good question. The question was whether it's a good thing to support the democracy in countries when turmoil follows the revolutions once any such revolution takes place and the resulting regimes are not as desirable. But this is a logic which can be applied to opposing many bad courses in the history. Just imagine the middle of the 19th century when at the end of the 1840s all Europe was in fire, and in America there was a stability. But for a small glitch there was slavery there. And then America moved to change that. A million people died. Was it a bad thing? Yes. There was a turmoil, the country was split. But what was the alternative? Keeping slavery. And the same is here. When you say that these bad guys were keeping that country in control, we have to pay attention, I think, to the meaning of what that control means. That control means oppression. That control means denial of fundamental rights. Are we okay with that? That's the question.
Okay, let's move to the next round of questions. That row, and then we're going to come back here and the question.
Kathy Cousin, U.S. Commissioner on International Religious Freedom. I want to point to two factors in U.S. policy that I don't think have been mentioned enough. That is, Azerbaijan plays a very important role in the Northern Distribution Network, and lobby money aside, people have different views of the importance of that, and some genuinely feel that's a very important issue to support our troops and Western troops in Afghanistan in general. And another factor is that the Obama administration has not even spoken out on a high public level about the various undemocratic laws passed in Russia last year. So I think it's in that context, I think it's very unlikely that the Obama administration is going to speak out publicly about what's going on in Azerbaijan. Since unfortunately, as they say in Russian, Russia makes the weather in that part of the world. I wanted to mention two issues that I don't think have been mentioned, and I know there are many issues that need to be addressed and have been addressed, and that is, well, more emphasis on religious dissent and the extremely restrictive religion law that was passed recently, a few years ago, environmental protests and labor protests, perhaps particularly important labor protests, and that seems to me to be a very simple way to convince people of the value of real democracy when it comes to their working conditions. Thanks.
Question here, second row.
Thank you. Eric Chenoweth, Institute for Democracy in Eastern Europe also. I have a comment that maybe people might want to respond to. I would say as depressing as Azerbaijan is right now, if you look back to the 70s, people were active in human rights were much more depressed about the Soviet Union. And the idea of change in the Soviet Union or changing the status quo in the Soviet Union was absolutely thought impossible. or even in any place in the Soviet bloc. And even after solidarity, 16 months of what they call the carnival, after it was repressed by martial law, most people thought solidarity was dead. You know, the dominant push always by the government, our US government under Reagan, was to lift sanctions and to deal with Jaruzelski. It was always the constant push. And the only reason why they didn't do that was because there was pushback. There were people and institutions who said that this was a bad idea, that solidarity wasn't dead, that Democrats were still existing and fighting in Poland. And I would like to congratulate you for having this event, because it's very important that you say there are Democrats in Azerbaijan. They are still fighting, and we need to support them. And you cannot let President Obama get away with this, you know, silent letter to Aliyev. There has to be an open letter to him that says, this is not a good thing for the US president to congratulate a dictator on you know, continuing his power.
And question,
my name is Samir Hezade, member of NIDA. My question is brief, and I expect also a brief answer. That this is a situation that my friends are now in jail, and they have in 14th they will have a code and there will be something regarding them. I don't know how much it will continue. The court decides something, but the fact that we have to protect them, we have to protect their rights, we have to do something. And I want to ask the speakers, what do you think we have to do in Washington, in Europe, to protect and do that they are not will be no more in jail and they will be released as soon as possible?
Okay, we have 3 questions or comments. One was about you know, the importance or relevant importance of Azerbaijan versus Russia and the Afghanistan war weighing in as a strategic interest. And then there's a comment about our protests, more labor protests, religious, and I believe it was labor and environmental protests, yeah. And then we had a comment about 1970s versus now, and how that, you know, there was a similar situation with arguing about why we should bother to save them, you know, lost cows, and how the cows can be saved by proving that it's not lost. And then a question from a gentleman from NIDA who asked about specifically what needs to be done to save the leadership, his people, his friends who are in jail right now. So I'll pass this to the panels. The only thing I want to also make a comment of my own about the question again about the Arab Spring comparison. One thing I would kind of suggest humbly that when we talk about it, we'll look at what US did to cause Arab Spring. And unless we believe in conspiracy theories that are originating in Middle East and around, that it was all CIA, they toppled Mubarak for unknown reasons, maybe something, the US really did nothing to stimulate Arab Spring. So when we talk about should we support democracy in Azerbaijan, it's not about should we create Arab Spring, it's about should we do something because it's going to happen whether we want it or not. Nobody really did a lot of political or monetary influence to make people rise up in Syria or in Libya. The problem is when they do, when we face a bigger problem, whether we should intervene militarily to save the massacres or not. So the question is what we do now to prevent that scenario where the Western countries find themselves that they have to do much more sacrifice, financial and human lives, to intervene, while they can intervene in a country like Azerbaijan. I don't want to use Azerbaijan versus other countries as an advantage. Maybe it's unfair, but it's not in a point where we have a choice between fundamentalist, grassroots maybe popular movement and a dictatorship. We have a society that probably has a better chances, not 100% guaranteed. Nobody can say that after Aliyev, Azerbaijan nothing bad will happen. But we know that if we wait, we can have something like Iran 79, where we did everything to save the Iranian Shah. We supported it in any way we can, but it didn't work, and we got this problem. So with that, I'll just pass for the next 3 questions to the panel.
I just wanted to say that it's a very good point about which I would formulate what to do to make sure that if the government falls anyhow, there are democratic elites which can do something about reigning over the, let's say, the chaos or those groups which will try to enter. And I think the groups can be both coming from the south and from the north. Destabilization of Azerbaijan, especially if Azerbaijan is now stopping to be such a gas station, as you ably called it, maybe then there will be some renewed interest of Russia and of Iran to weaken Azerbaijan. And I mean, Azerbaijan has one big supporter, which is Turkey. And in a way, we also see that Turkey is being destabilized by different forces. And I think that definitely, if I was to worry, or I would do worry, but if I was paid to worry about the future of the Caucasus, I would really pay attention to maybe unlikely scenario, but if people go on the street, will there be somebody to tell them, let's go and start, organizing ourselves around this and that thing?
Thank you. I also support Elmar when I also support Elmar when he was saying that we shouldn't mix Arab Spring. I mean, what we want in Azerbaijan, democracy or Arab Spring. Of course, we want the democracy, not the Arab Spring. And actually, the human rights activists and also independent and opposition politicians, they are doing exactly the things what actually prevent Arab Spring in Azerbaijan. If there will be no any kind of activism, there will be apathy in the society. Of course, it will end with the Arab Spring events, and you cannot control it because the Arab Spring events didn't control by anyone. I believe to that. And the responsibility of Arab Spring is not on the forces who came to the power and couldn't manage with the administration or regulation in the society. It's a responsibility of those dictators who decided to sit in the power more than 40 years. So we should ask them questions why, and we should bring them to the responsibility because of the chaos what the Arab countries have right now. The other my point will be about religion and the religious activists in Azerbaijan, and also how Russia and Iran, impacts to Azerbaijani government. I don't believe that Azerbaijani government arrested liberals, arrested young people, and arrested the believers and religious activists by the order of Iran or Russia. It's a dictatorship. The Azerbaijani government is dictatorship itself. There is no need of Iran or Russia to impact the Azerbaijani government in terms of that. Why religious people started to be arrested? Because Azerbaijani government banned hijab in the schools in November of 2010. And if we will look the chronology of the arrest of religious people, all of them arrested since January of 2011, when chairman and the members of Islamic Party openly and very harshly criticized Ilham Aliyev because of the hijab ban, also because of the corruption, also because of violation of other rights. And then following this criticism, protest demonstrations organized by religious people and participants of peaceful demonstrations, now imprisoned from 1.5 years to 6 years to 7 years. So it's not about that there is a radical Islam in Azerbaijan. The Azerbaijani government itself interested in forced radicalization of Islamist groups in Azerbaijan to manipulate with United States and to manipulate with other Western countries, showing that, you see, we have Iran in our neighbor, they can do something. We have Russia in our neighbor, we can do something. I can understand Russia or Iranian governments are calling to Ilham Aliyev and saying that ban the protest demonstration in the city of Baku. Of course no. Or they are saying that arrest these people, don't arrest the other people. Of course no. So it is the good manipulation using by Azerbaijani government that we have Russia in north and Iran in south to prolong the life of their government. Russia and Iran has their own problems if we are talking about the creation of the problems. It's not, I mean, for me it's not a strong argument. Thank you.
I think I'll respond to the question about what can be done in individual cases of political prisoners. What we need more of is support to the individuals, so anything from statements in their cases, ensuring that there are observers from the embassies and international organizations throughout their trial, when possible, visits to them in detention, which is difficult to get access to, but some international experts and senior officials can, this sort of thing. But the simple answer is to impact change, really, to link it to something that the Azerbaijanis want. And so I don't know if something, returning to the idea of a White House visit, for example, if it was linked to the terms of release all 140 political prisoners in Azerbaijan, and then you get a White House visit, I don't know if it would work. But if you find these things that they do want and link it concretely to specific measures, I mean, that's the way to accomplish these things. I mean, smaller things, I don't know, Azerbaijan does trade votes at the UN General Assembly, for example, when support on certain things, and it might be willing to compromise on others. I don't know, visits of senior officials to Azerbaijan, or visits of Azerbaijani officials to the US, these sorts of things, if we link them to things and predicate, you know, these rewards on actual reforms, then that would be effective, I think.
Okay,
in the case of solidarity, sort of the unexpected threat coming from an unexpected corner, working class movement challenging allegedly a working class government. And we're looking at more recent cases, you know, case of Syria. The uprising really began in the very loyalist portion of Syria. In the case of Azerbaijan, do you see anybody who is relatively as powerful financially and otherwise who would challenge Aliyev, be that from within country or perhaps from Russia, where you have a lot of rich businessmen who sort of hinted at their interest in maybe seeing somebody else in the leadership of Azerbaijan. Any speculations in that regard?
May I make a correction? But this was not an internal movement or within the ruling party. These were the workers at the lowest level who didn't like the Communist Party, which simply by, you know, some reasons call itself a workers' party. In Syria, it's different. People loyal to the regime, and we had several countries where one could see that one was trying or was that within the ruling elite somebody would overthrow somebody. And I would say that in most of the cases it doesn't work. First of all, it doesn't work very well to have such expectations. Don't forget that for years people were expecting that some changes in the elites of the Soviet Union would change, you know, Brezhnev, Andropov, So maybe the people who already are for many years in the ruling elite are not necessarily the best one to create democracy unless they are pushed from outside, let's say, or they are pushed by economic reasons. Like, let's say, Gorbachev was from the inside, and this was the economic and ethnic composition of the Soviet Union, the total collapse of everything, which pushed him to do certain types of reforms. But finally, what happened in Russia, the reforms of the democratic movement did not go practically, very far, while in Azerbaijan, it went much farther. I'm talking 88 to 92. So.
Armin Aliyev, I have a question because we touched so much about human factor and civil society, especially in Azerbaijan, it's very important. My question relates to the political prisoners, of course. I mean, it's not just political prisoners today in the prison, it's a whole generation of the people who come through the system. Maybe thousands of people come through the system being in the prison over the years, and it's not about them being rehabilitation. They're being either on the mercy of the government being released or under the amnesty. They're not just being like rehabilitated, like they were not innocent, they were released because government was wrong. Most of the time, just government feels like it's a holiday or it's some kind of event, just release some people, then arrest later. It becomes like an assembly line going around all this time. And my question is, before Azerbaijan was a member of the Council of Europe or before any of these high institutions, there was a hope like the countries like Azerbaijan was looking at these institutions like something higher level, saying that, okay, we have to respect them, their views, and now they become, Azerbaijan countries like become a member of this kind of organizations. Now it's become like a game of how to buy all these organizations into playing their own games. And people who are in the prisons, like political prisoners, their last hope is kind of disappearing because their hope was like this organization going to defend them, to release them. They're not going to sit in prisons for many years before they get pardoned and under certain terms. So when they get out, they start working or leave the country. Now, my concern is, since it's like it becomes a conflict of the interest, what's the purpose of this organization serve now? Because before it was the Soviet Union wasn't part of these organizations. Now countries post-Soviet Union, like Azerbaijan, became a member of these organizations. Now they can use power, money, bribery, corruption to get into these organizations, not just getting into those organizations, plus they're using other countries in the other Eastern European countries to get a coalition to vote against some kind of resolutions. And which kind of next generation sitting in the prison even less coupled, so when they get out, they just don't want to continue anymore struggle against this regime because they feel like it's nonsense, everything that can be bought and sold. And I just want to find out your view, what's going on in these terms, because that's a stuff that we can do from our side in the United States, in the Europe, not inside Azerbaijan, where the values of the Western societies are being bought and sold.
My name is Mubarak. I'm not from Egypt, and I don't relate to that gentleman. I have a comment. I'm from Uzbekistan, and I understand you very well, but I think you are on the halfway, which we already went through. And I have a question. What do you think, where do you see your president in 15 years, in 20 years? Because we see our president for 24 years already. You're on your halfway. Do you think there is a way somehow to go through this faster than we, for example? And do you think your president learns a lot from our experience, from our countries? Because 24 years, it's a whole generation. It's a second generation started living in this situation, and he has a lot of mechanism, and I know that the same your president used, and he's already.
It was an interesting discussion, and I hope we'll continue these discussions. There will be, we'll announce exact date, but in probably a couple of weeks we'll have another event with conversation with other opposition presidential candidate Jamil Hassanli, who will be on a visit here. So we'll announce, stay tuned, we'll be on our AZAD website and AZAD reports website, and you'll get somehow the exact date. Well, thank you very much. Specifically, I want to thank the presenters for excellent and very insightful presentations, and also the audience for very helpful, very interesting questions that kept the discussion going for so long. I think Irena wanted to...
Just and that we send the best wishes to Paul Goebel, who was not feeling very well and who I think is a brilliant man, analyzing not only Azerbaijan but practically all of the non-Russian countries of the Soviet Union. He wanted to be here, he couldn't, and I think we all missed him very much.